everyone, this is Bhavna from Z Business. With Budget 2025 just around the corner, we are gearing up to give you the latest trends and insights. In this session of Budget Bucket List, we will dive into Madan Sadnavi's key predictions and expectations from the upcoming Union Budget. Madan is a chief economist at Bank of Baroda. Hello sir, welcome to Z Business.
Hello, thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, so let's start with, as we know, Budget 2025 is approaching. How would you describe the current status of the Indian economy?
See, the Indian economy is in a very stable condition. So, contrary to the feeling which some people got on account of the GDP growth numbers coming in at 6.4% against RBI's forecast of 6.6%, if you actually do a deep dive analysis and look at how the economy has performed in the last couple of months, we have seen a significant turnaround, especially in the months of October and November, especially in sectors like manufacturing. Now, manufacturing is a sector which was responsible for this low growth of 6.4%. And we've already seen a turnaround in this particular sector. This is based on the PMI numbers, as well as the industrial growth numbers, which came out a couple of days back. And we've also seen that consumption on the whole has also shown a remarkable turnaround in the months of October, November, and December. This is going by the GST data.
As we know, many tax exemptions and deductions are offered in India. Do you think there is a need to simplify or reduce them?
So I think definitely there is a case for providing certain tax incentives. The reason is that while I did say that consumption is something which has turned around, we have seen that the two major problems which the Indian economy has had, one is in terms of consumption not growing at the right speed, and the second one is investment. And the two of them are actually interlinked. So unless I have high consumption, only then will I have better capacity utilization rates, and only then will industry invest more. So especially if you look at the consumer goods industries, there definitely seems to be less investment taking place because we're not seeing adequate demand. Now, one way in which the budget can address it is by giving certain tax incentives, and these tax incentives can be either in terms of the exemptions which are there, or in terms of lowering the rates. Now, we must remember that the government has already introduced a dual tax system for individuals. There's the old tax scheme, which gives certain exemptions, you get certain incentives, but the rates tend to be slightly higher. And you have the new tax scheme where the finance minister stated that most people have actually shifted to the new tax scheme, where you actually have lower interest rates, lower tax rates, but at the same time you don't get any exemptions. Now, I think there is scope for the new tax scheme to actually keep widening these bands so that you're able to provide more disposable income to individuals. And this has to be done across the board, because if we do it just at the lower levels, which has been the tendency in the past, that particular category of people may not be having the kind of consuming power, the spending power, something which is really required in a big way in order to push overall consumption. So I think there's a strong case for looking at the income tax structure and providing certain incentives so that there is an increase in the disposable income in the hands of individuals.
Right. So, which area should the government focus on while reviewing these exemptions?
See, I think when you're looking at these exemptions, I would actually say that you'll have to draw a balance between both consumption as well as savings. Like, for example, if you're talking in terms of the ATC section, for example, okay, we have a certain amount of money which can be kept if you're in the old tax scheme where you're able to draw benefits up to 1.5 lakhs. Now, there is scope for actually increasing it, because we have seen that in India, we're having a dual problem. One is in terms of consumption. The second thing is even in terms of savings. Financial savings have also been affected. And the banking system in particular has gotten affected because today there are benefits which go to the equity markets, but not to bank deposits. So I think there is a reason for one to argue for saying that we need to increase savings, and this can be done by providing certain benefits on bank deposits in particular.
Okay, so India is working to increase revenue from direct taxes as compared with indirect taxes, right? So are there any specific steps can the government take to create a balance between these two?
So actually what you said is right. We need to have a balance between direct and indirect taxes, because the direct is something which we're very sure of. So as an income tax, you earn a certain amount of income and you're paying a certain amount of tax. The same thing also holds for corporate taxes. Whereas when we're talking of indirect taxes, a lot depends upon whether people are spending or not. Because, for example, if our imports fall, we do not import goods, then automatically my customs collections come down. Similarly, GST is a consumption-based tax. Now, just suppose for some reason consumption slows down, we'll see that the GST collections also get affected. And we've also seen that something with lower consumption of, say, diesel, which we have seen in the current financial year, has also affected the excise collections. So I think we need to have a balance between the two of them. Though I think from the point of view of theory, people would say that indirect taxes is better because it's based on the actual spending power, it's more equitable. Whereas when you're talking of direct taxes, it seems to be a kind of a rule which is placed saying that everybody in a certain category has to pay.
For small businesses and micro sector, what tax benefit should the government introduce in 2025, in your view?
See, more than the tax benefit, because I think the taxes have already been, the tax structure has already been specified in 2019. So I don't think anything on the tax side is required. But definitely, I think if you have a PLI scheme for MSMEs, I think that would be very effective. Because so far, if you look at the focus on MSMEs from the point of view of the government, it has been more on in terms of credit. How do I make sure that the banks lend money? So we have this entire scheme of saying that how do I make sure that banks give credit to SMEs and you get a credit guarantee. A credit guarantee scheme also exists. So these are things which need to be there, things which could be expanded. But I think if you give a PLI scheme giving a direct incentive saying that, look, if you produce a certain amount of output, you employ a certain number of people, you invest a certain amount of money, and finally your output which comes through, you could get a set off.
Job creation is a big need, especially in rural areas, right? So how can tax and related policies support labor-intensive industries?
So in terms of employment, I think we have to look at two things. One is what I do directly. When I do directly in the sense we have a NREGA program, which actually provides 100 days of work to people in the agricultural sector, basically farmers. Meant for people between the two harvests, you're providing these 100 days of work. So we have a NREGA program which is there. And I think there's a strong argument to say that we need to be having a similar kind of scheme also in the urban area. Because right now we're tackling rural unemployment, but we can also do it for urban employment. But when I'm talking of things like the PLI, for example, so I think that's where we have a potential to say that the government gives a certain subsidy. It can be a large company or maybe an MSME, where you also put a condition of saying that besides investment and output, which is currently being looked at by the scheme, you also need to employ a certain number of people. So I think that is the kind of route which could be used by the government in the budget to make sure that you're able to push up employment in a more direct manner.
Right, sir. So do you think concern about HNPV are overblown from an economic perspective, as cases are rising in India?
No, I think yes, it may be slightly exaggerated. I'm not really quite an expert in the medical field to provide any concrete answers here. But from what I've read in the media, I've seen the interviews, how the doctors have spoken about it. I don't think it's a major problem. It seems to be something which was there earlier, and that's not something which is going to strain the budget. But I'm quite sure that the government will be cognizant of the fact that any such problem, like even when COVID came initially, none of us knew it would be a very serious thing, but it did turn out to be serious. So I'm quite sure the government will make certain provisions in the budget. But as of now, prima facie does not appear to be a major risk factor as far as India's growth is concerned, or something which the government should be overly concerned with.
Right, sir. So finally, what is your wish list for the upcoming union budget?
See, as economists, we are actually very much concerned about overall debt and fiscal deficit. So I think the important part is that just prior to COVID times, we had fiscal deficits which were much lower. And if you thought the total amount of borrowing in the market was less than 10 lakh crores. But then when we had COVID, the government did take upon the responsibility of ensuring that the economy moved on. So we had very high fiscal deficits which came through. And there was high borrowing which took place in the market. Now, what the government has done is that they have systematically decided to bring down the fiscal deficit ratio to 4.5% next year. So I think that is something which seems to be very much doable. In fact, we are very much on that path. 4.9% was targeted for 24-25. My sense is it will be slightly lower than that, which means that you can actually go to something like 4.3, 4.4% for 25-26. So I think that is something which I will be looking forward to it. And of course, from the point of view of being an individual, all of us would be happy with tax breaks in terms of income tax, any kind of relief out there, because definitely the case is that GST is virtually out of it, and GST is not providing any relief to households. So I think the only relief which can come is if something is done on the income tax front, because we should remember that inflation is something which is progressive in nature. And the third part is, I think, something like capital expenditure, something on which the government should continue focusing on. Because while we are all talking in terms of private sector investment, we have seen that private sector investment takes place only when there's a return on capital. So as a company, I will not invest unless I'm sure there's demand. And as we spoke earlier, demand needs to have higher consumption. I need to have better capacity utilization. Only then will I invest in fresh machinery. So I think these are the three things on my wish list. And working in a bank, yes, I would also like to have further incentives given on bank deposits, because banks are being facing this problem in terms of funds moving over into the equity market. You get better tax benefits out there.
Okay, so thank you, Madan. Thanks for talking to Z Business.
Thanks.